If you ever wondered how far someone will go when they think nothing can touch them, or how fast a life can unravel when truth finally catches up, then listen carefully. Because this story begins with a woman who believed her badge, made her untouchable until she met a man who refused to shrink, refused to bend, and refused to let another quiet injustice disappear. His name was Eric Hale, and nothing about him looked like trouble. But trouble had a way of finding men who looked like him. A quiet return that should have been peaceful, the air in Riverbend, Georgia always felt thick in early summer, warm enough to soften your breath, heavy enough to make the sky look tired. Eric rolled into town on a Friday afternoon, driving a rented gray sedan that still smelled faintly of airport disinfectant. In the passenger seat sat a small grocery bag, milk, a loaf of bread, and a pack of cinnamon cookies his mother loved. It had been almost 11 months since he last visited. His work in Portland kept him busy, and life had a way of stretching time without warning. But when he pulled onto Brooks Avenue, the houses looked exactly the same, quiet, familiar and patient. He should have felt at ease. He should have been thinking about his mother's smile when he walked through the door. He should have been planning a slow, simple weekend. But before he reached the next stop sign, a chill crawled across his shoulders, a tension he couldn't quite place. A police cruiser was behind him at first. He told himself it was nothing. Cars shared roads. Cops patrolled neighborhoods. Life was normal, but the cruiser stayed behind him. For 1 block. 2, 3. By block 5, Eric's heartbeat settled into a slow, practiced drumbeat, the same rhythm so many men like him knew too well. A tail that refused to go away, he flicked on his turn signal, hoping to create distance. He switched lanes with care. He slowed down just a touch, but the cruiser's lights snapped on in a burst of red and blue. A single sharp chirp of the siren followed. Eric breathed out, not in fear, but in resignation. "Here we go," he whispered. He pulled over to the curb and waited. The cruiser door opened, and out stepped Officer Dana Crossa, woman in her late 40s, with short blonde hair, stiff posture, and a walk that told the world she expected obedience before explanation. Her reflectionless sunglasses made her expression unreadable. Her hand rested on her holster as if by instinct. But Eric noticed the way she held it, not protective, not cautious, possessive, as if touching it reminded her who held power in this conversation. "License and registration," she said. Not hello. "Not, sir?" Not even a tone that suggested she saw him as a person. Eric kept both hands on the steering wheel. "Sure," he said calmly. "I'm reaching into the glove box. Nice and slow." "Do it slower," she snapped. Another hook tightened inside Eric's chest, but he stayed steady. He moved deliberately, handed her the documents, watched her mouth tighten as she read them. A question that shifted everything. "What brings you over here?" she asked. "My mother lives up the road," Eric answered. 2 blocks away. This car is rented. "I flew in yesterday." Her stare grew longer, harder. Then she said the words that always came before something bad. "Step out of the vehicle." Eric blinked. "For what reason?" "Step out of the vehicle." Something in her tone made it clear this wasn't about safety. This was about control. He stepped out, hands visible. Confusion brewing, but still composed. Officer Cross circled him slowly, as if examining a threat only she could see, or a target she had already decided was guilty. "You match the description of someone involved in a robbery this morning," she said. "I've been at my mother's house all morning," he replied. "You're welcome to verify that." She didn't verify anything. She didn't check. She didn't ask. She simply radioed for backup. "The moment everything changed, officer?" "I know my rights," Eric said. "I haven't done anything, hands on the hood," she barked. "Are you seriously detaining me?" he asked, still calm. She walked up and shoved him against the car. That was the moment something inside him shifted, not fear, and not anger. A quiet disappointment. A tiredness born from experience. He placed his palms on the hot metal and let her search him. "I'm a consultant," he said softly. "I work with large companies. I don't carry weapons or drugs. You're making a mistake." "Don't talk," she snapped. You're making it worse. Back up arrived a younger officer named Lopez, who looked unsure the moment he stepped out of the patrol car. Dana whispered something to him, but his expression didn't match hers. His eyes showed doubt. Eric saw it. Dana didn't? She cuffed Eric anyway? On what charge? He asked, resisting arrest. I didn't resist. You raised your voice. You stepped toward me. No, Eric replied, steady and direct. I asked a question. That's all. She didn't answer. She just shoved him into the back of her car and drove him toward the station. And this is where her world starts, cracking as the station came into view. Eric stared at the floor of the cruiser. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably his mom waiting for the groceries he never dropped off. The milk would spoil. The cookies would melt. But none of that mattered anymore. He wasn't thinking about food. He was thinking about the last time he saw someone get cuffed for nothing. That story didn't end well. But Eric wasn't afraid. He was tired. Tired of people like her. Tired of proving himself. Tired of watching someone else rewrite the truth in real time. And Officer Dana Cross, who believed she had pulled over just another quiet man who would shrink, apologize, or disappear into paperwork, had no idea that this time she had picked the wrong person, because Eric Hale wasn't going to break. He wasn't going to back down. And he wasn't going to stay silent no matter how hard she tried. The station felt colder than the outside air, not because of temperature, but because of the way people looked at him. Quick glances, assumptions made in half a second. Someone handed him a clipboard without speaking. Someone else pointed him toward a camera for a mugshot. Every action moved fast, as if the system had been waiting for him long before he arrived. Officer Cross filled out her report at a nearby desk. Eric watched the way her pen moved, casual, practiced, almost bored. Words flowed from her hand like lines she'd written before. Aggressive, raised voice. Threatening posture. Non-compliant. She wrote them as if they were facts, not fabrications. But one detail bothered her. Even if she pretended it didn't. He hadn't reacted the way others did. He didn't cry. He didn't beg. He didn't explode. He looked her straight in the eyes with calm she couldn't shake off. Something unfamiliar tugged at her chest. Something she wasn't used to feeling. Unease still. She shoved the feeling aside and ordered him to a holding cell. Hours passed. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering now and then like a tired heartbeat. The bench was hard and cold. No pillow, no blanket, no explanation, no phone call. Just the sound of distant voices and the occasional door slamming. Most people would have unraveled. Eric didn't. He sat with his back against the wall, arms resting loosely on his knees. His wrists hurt from the cuffs, but his mind stayed clear, thought through every detail like he would for a client. He reviewed the conversation, the shove, the tone, the backup officer's expression. He replayed it all without panic, only focus. Around 7 in the morning, cell door finally opened. An older officer with gray streaks in his hair steps inside with a clipboard in his hand, looking at Eric like he wasn't sure what kind of man sat in front of him. "You're being charged with obstruction of justice and resisting arrest," he said. "Your bail hearing is scheduled for this afternoon." Eric stared at him. "I didn't resist anything. I didn't obstruct anything. I was pulled over for no reason." The officer shifted, uncomfortable. "It's all in the report. I'd like to see the report. You'll need your lawyer for that. And I'd like to make a call." Finally got his one phone call. Dialed Marcus Dean, Law school friend he hadn't spoken to in years. A sharp, stubborn attorney in Savannah who once told him, "If you ever get in trouble, call me before you call your mother." Marcus answered on the third ring. "Eric, you sound like you're calling from a fishbowl. I'm in custody." "What happened?" "A traffic stop." "Say no more," Marcus said. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. I don't talk to anyone." Eric hung up, leaned his head back against the wall, and exhaled. Help was coming not because he couldn't fight alone, but because he knew the system wasn't built for men like him to fight without someone in their corner. Later that afternoon, Marcus walked into the station wearing a navy suit and an expression that said he didn't come to negotiate, he came to win. Officer Cross watched him from her desk. He was calm, calculated, confident without arrogance, and something in her stomach twisted. She didn't like him. She didn't like the way he walked. She didn't like the idea of anyone challenging her authority. He approached her desk. "I'm representing Mr. Hale," Marcus said. "I need to see the incident report and the arrest footage from last night." "That's internal," she replied. "We'll release it to the court. If your report is accurate, I'm sure you won't mind me reviewing the footage now." She had no comeback for that. She only stared at him, jaw tight, hands stiff. 2 hours later, Eric walked out on bail with Marcus beside him. Officer Cross watched them step into the sunlight. In her mind, things should have been over. Routine stop. Routine paperwork. Another day, another perceived threat neutralized. But something felt wrong now. She felt the smallest crack in the armor she had built for years. That night, she sat in her small apartment on the south side of town, staring at her written report. Every line felt familiar because she had written versions of it before. Slight changes. Slight adjustments. Same meaning. Suspect became aggressive. Suspect refused to comply. Suspect was detained for safety. But she opened her laptop, clicked on the dashcam footage, and watched the truth play out. She watched herself shove him. She watched him stay calm. She watched her tone escalate for no reason she could justify. She paused the footage and stared at her, own frozen image hand on his shoulder, force unnecessary power abused. She closed the laptop, stood up, and walked away. Across town, Eric and Marcus sat in a small rental house surrounded by papers, old case files, and half-eaten takeout containers. Marcus tapped his pen against a stack of complaints. "She's done this before," Marcus said. "Patterns don't lie." 2 complaints sealed, another dismissed. All from black men. All in the past 5 years. Eric leaned forward, eyes steady. "I'm not letting this go." "You sure? This won't be quick." "I don't care. People like her count on silence." "I'm done being silent." Marcus nodded slowly. "And tomorrow morning we subpoenaed the dashcam." Meanwhile, Officer Cross showed up to her shift acting like nothing bothered her. Chin high, shoulders squared. The uniform straightened with practiced pride. But something followed her, something small but sharp. Doubt. She told herself she had done nothing wrong. She told herself Eric was exaggerating. She told herself Marcus was just a lawyer looking for a headline. She told herself a lot of things. But none of them felt as solid as they used to, because she knew the truth. The truth had a way of getting louder the more you tried to bury it. If you're ready. Part 3 will continue directly from here, picking up with the courthouse clerk, who decides to break years of silence and the town that begins to wake up. Days passed, but the tension didn't fade. It spread, quietly at first, like a rumor people were afraid to say out loud. Officer Cross noticed it every time she walked through the station. The slight pauses in conversation, the careful smiles, the way Officer Lopez avoided meeting her eyes. Even the ones who still greeted her did it with voices too polite, too measured. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself she still had control, but something inside her had started to slip. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that someone else was watching the case closely. Someone who had seen too much over the years and carried her own quiet guilt like a stone in her chest. Her name was Raina Blake, a courthouse clerk with a calm voice and sharp memory. She grew up in the same part of town where Officer Cross had once patrolled. She remembered the way things used to go. Who got stopped? Who got searched? Who got let go? She remembered her own brother at 17, arrested for obstructing an officer. Even though all he did was question why he was being stopped, same wording, same pattern, same badge. So when she saw a new file with Eric Hale's name attached to Officer Dana Cross, something inside her clicked like a long-stuck lock finally turning. She didn't go to the police. She didn't call the news. She didn't whisper it at work. She went straight to Marcus. They met at a quiet cafe just off Riverbend's old downtown strip. After closing hours, when the chairs sat upside down on tables and only one lamp glowed near the window, Raina sat with her back straight. Hands folded, a folder tucked under her arm. She didn't waste time. "I know what she's been doing," she said. "And I'm not the only one." Marcus leaned in, surprised but careful. "Are you willing to talk?" "I'll testify," she said. "I'll say everything I saw, Everything we were told to file and forget. Eric stared at her, unsure whether to be grateful or angry that she'd waited this long. Why now? He asked quietly. She didn't break eye contact, because I should have spoken 5 years ago. And I'm tired of feeling like I helped cover it up. Her words hit hard, honest, heavy, real. Marcus didn't speak right away. He simply nodded, slow and steady. Then we add your statement to the motion, he said. This changes everything. They prepared documents and statements that would shake the entire department. Officer Cross sat alone in her small living room staring at the evening news. She was halfway through changing channels when her own name scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Officer facing misconduct inquiry after controversial traffic stop. She froze. The remote slipped in her hand. Her throat tightened. The coverage was brief, but it hit harder than any punch. She shut the TV off before the segment finished and sat in the dark, staring at her reflection in the blank screen at roll call the next morning. The air felt different, heavier, thicker. Some officers avoided looking at her altogether. Others gave stiff nods, the kind meant to distance, not support. Even Lopez murmured a greeting so quiet she barely heard it. When the meeting ended, her supervisor called her into his office. He shut the door, and his voice dropped to a low tone that made her stomach twist. We're placing you on restricted duty until the hearing. Her jaw tightened. I followed protocol. We'll let the court determine that. The words felt like a slap. As she left the room, something inside her chest sank. It wasn't fear, not yet. It was something harder to face, recognition. Recognition that this time was different. This time someone was pushing back. This time the system she relied on to shield her was hesitating. And while she tried to convince herself she could still spin things her way, the truth was closing in. Slow but unstoppable. The same truth that was starting to spread across town like a spark, landing on dry leaves. People talked in church basements, in barbershops, in school break rooms, in grocery store aisles. Some said Eric had been targeted. Others insisted he must have done something wrong. But almost everyone had an opinion, and each conversation added weight to the growing pressure. One afternoon, a retired mechanic named Walter Harris showed up at Marcus's office. The man looked tired, like life had worn grooves into his expression. She did the same to me, he said. Back in 2014, he told them about a night after work, simple drive home, a stop sign he never rolled through, the shove against the hood, the threats, the citation he didn't deserve. Never told anybody, Walter said. Didn't think it'd matter. Marcus studied him with steady eyes. Would you say it on record? Walter hesitated. You sure they'll listen now? Marcus nodded. We only need one truth to crack the surface. In this case, this is the crack. Meanwhile, Officer Cross's world shrank even more. She went to her usual coffee shop, only to watch a woman step out of line when she stood behind her. A man she recognized from her neighborhood turned and walked the other way when she approached. Conversations died when she arrived at the station. Her locker had been quietly moved to the far corner of the room. She told herself it was temporary. She told herself it would blow over. She told herself she was still respected, but deep down she knew something had changed. A mirror became her enemy. Every time she looked, she saw someone she didn't completely recognize anymore. Someone cracking under pressure. Someone who had built a life on a version of power she was now losing grip of that weekend. Her brother called from South Florida. You okay? He asked. I'm fine. You sure? I saw your name in the news. It's politics, she said quickly. People trying to make noise. Just make sure you're telling the truth, Dana, because if you're not, I said I'm fine. He went quiet and hung up softly. She tossed her phone aside and stared at the ceiling. The silence in the room felt suffocating. She thought about Raina. She thought about old complaints. She thought about files someone might have kept. About people who hadn't forgotten, and for the first time in years, Officer Dana Cross felt something close to fear. 2 weeks later, the courthouse in Pinebrook stood under a pale morning sky, its stone steps worn smooth by decades of arguments, confessions, and judgments. The building was old, but on that day it felt like it was holding its breath. People gathered not because they were forced to, but because they could smell something shifting in the air. It wasn't just another hearing. Not this time. Marcus filed his motion to suppress the false report, alongside a formal request for full access to Officer Cross's dashcam footage. The moment that footage was approved for review, the tone of the entire town changed. Anyone who had ever crossed paths with Dana Cross listened a little closer. Anyone who ever wondered if they were the only one began whispering to someone else. Doubt spread. Yes, but so did hope. That morning, Officer Crow sat in her cruiser outside the courthouse, the court notice folded twice in her hand. She stared at it like it might suddenly rewrite itself if she glared long enough. Her jaw clenched. Her breath tightened. She hated the feeling rising inside her, the slow, hot pressure that comes when a truth you buried starts clawing its way back up. She tried to steady herself. She told herself she could still win. She still had her uniform, her training, her years on the force. She still had people who believed in her, at least. She hoped she did. On the other side of town, Eric sat in Marcus's office, surrounded by documents spread across the table like puzzle pieces waiting to be aligned. Old articles, complaint records, affidavits, patterns upon patterns. This is her, Marcus said, sliding a 2017 newspaper clipping toward him. Boy was 18, college-bound, wrong place, wrong time. Same officer. Same language in the report. Eric studied the boy's face, shung, hopeful, unaware of how things could shift in a second. What happened to him? He asked quietly. Broken wrist after the stop, Marcus said. Family didn't push. They didn't have the resources. Eric set the clipping down with a slow exhale. That ends now. And as if the universe agreed. Someone else was preparing to step into the light. Raina Blake walked into Marcus's office after work, a folder tucked under her arm, her posture upright and sure. She placed the folder on the table without ceremony. These are copies of old logs, she said. Complaints. Notes we were told to store and forget. But I didn't forget. Eric blinked. You kept them? I kept what I knew would matter one day, she said. I didn't know when that day would come. But it's here. Her voice didn't shake. She wasn't afraid. She looked like someone who had waited years for a chance to speak the truth out loud. They added her affidavit to the growing. A stack of evidence, a stack thick enough to make a judge lean in and listen. Meanwhile, Dana Cross's nights became long and restless. She'd sit on her couch staring at her phone, waiting for someone from the department to reassure her. To tell her it was all going to blow over, to tell her the town would take her side, but no one called. Sometimes she scrolled through old photos, graduation academy, first day on patrol. Back then her badge felt like a shield, a promise, a purpose. Now it felt heavy, like metal tied to sinking stone. On the eve of the hearing, she sat parked outside the station, staring at the glow of courthouse windows across the street. Her heart thudded slow and heavy. She could lie on the stand. She could defend her report. She could twist the narrative just enough, but then the dashcam footage arrived. The real footage. The truth that didn't bend. There was no escaping it now. The next morning, the courtroom hummed with low chatter. Wooden benches filled with neighbors, teachers, retirees, city workers. Some came to support Eric. Some came out of curiosity. Some came because they'd heard her name before and wondered if justice finally had teeth. Eric sat at the defense table, calm, hands folded. Marcus stood beside him, flipping through documents with the ease of someone who had prepared for every angle. Across the room, Officer Cross sat rigid in her uniform. Her jaw clenched, eyes locked straight ahead. But her fingers twitched every few seconds, a small, unintentional tremor. Judge Alina Ward entered, her presence commanding enough to silence the room in a heartbeat. The gavel struck once. All rise. Everyone stood. Everyone sat. This wasn't a trial yet, just a preliminary hearing. A hearing meant to determine whether this case had enough weight to move forward. But everyone in that room already knew. It wasn't just about charges. It was about truth finally climbing out of the shadows. Marcus stood and walked forward. Your Honor, we request to begin with the dashcam footage from Officer Cross's vehicle. This evidence directly contradicts the written report. The judge nodded once. Proceed. The lights dimmed slightly as the footage began. Red and blue lights flashed. Eric's car slowed to a stop. Officer Cross's voice played loud and clear. Command's sharp tone, escalating without reason. The shove. The cuffs. The calm questions he asked. The lack of resistance. The room grew still, so still that breaths felt loud. When it ended, Judge Ward turned to Officer Cross. Officer, does this video match the account you provided in your report? Dana's throat tightened. Not exactly, Your Honor, but in the moment, did the defendant raise his voice at any point? No. Did he ever lunge toward you? He questioned my authority. Or that was not my question. Did he resist you physically? Dana swallowed hard, staring straight ahead. No, she said. He didn't. A murmur rolled through the courtroom, not chaos, not gasps. Just a soft wave of people finally hearing a truth spoken out loud. Marcus stepped forward again. Your Honor, we also have sworn statements from 3 other men in this community who encountered nearly identical treatment from Officer Cross. Called Walter Harris to the stand. Walter adjusted his shirt collar and cleared his throat. Before detailing his own stop from years prior, then came a retired teacher, then a warehouse worker. Each story aligned in ways too, deliberate to ignore patterns, power, silence, all unraveling in front of everyone. And finally, it was Officer Cross's turn. She stepped onto the stand slowly, her legs stiff, her face pale. She sat with her hands locked tightly in her lap. Marcus approached. Officer Cross, how many formal complaints have been filed against you during your career? She stared downward. 4. Do you believe any of them were valid? No, even this one. She hesitated. Her jaw quivered. She blinked fast. I believed I was following protocol, and now? Silence stretched across the room like a drawn breath. Dana glanced at the judge. Then at Raina Blake, sitting near the back. Finally, she looked at Eric, who watched her with steady eyes, not hateful. Not vengeful, just firm. Yes, she whispered. I believe I was wrong. Judge Ward called for a short recess. People whispered. Some angry, some relieved, some stunned. But this wasn't over. Not yet. When the court resumed, the judge delivered her ruling. There is sufficient evidence to move forward with a full trial against Officer Cross for misconduct and falsifying a police report. The gavel struck Dot, and in that moment, the shield Dana Cross had hidden behind for years finally cracked beyond repair. The full trial didn't drag on the way some do. Once the dashcam footage reached the public, there was no way to shove this story back into the shadows. Local media played the clip again and again. Neighbors sent it to each other. People watched it on their phones at lunch breaks and in parking lots, shaking their heads. Soon, bigger outlets picked it up. In a few days, the name Officer Dana Cross became something more than just a name in a small town. It became a symbol people used when they talked about what goes wrong when power goes unchecked. Inside the department, for a fight. I cannot. I'm sensible. She was placed on unpaid suspension. Her union lawyer started building a defense full of careful language. Words like misinterpretation, emotional strain, and split-second decision showed up again and again, but out there. Beyond those walls, people had already seen the video. 3 weeks later, The courtroom filled again for the verdict. There were no empty benches. People arrived early, sitting shoulder to shoulder, teachers, factory workers, retirees, teenagers with their hoods half up, parents holding folded arms across their chests. There were no uniforms on Dana now, no badge pinned over her heart. Just a plain blazer, a tight ponytail, and a face that looked like it hadn't slept in days. Eric sat a few rows ahead, wearing the same quiet focus he'd carried from the start. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't shaking. He was just there, breathing, present, seeing it through. Behind him, Raina sat with her hands folded in her lap, steady as ever. Walter sat nearby, shoulders a little straighter than the last time he walked into this room. A few other men who'd come forward took their seats too, their presence a living record of everything that had been ignored for years. Judge Ward returned to the bench. The room dropped into silence without anyone being told to quiet down. After reviewing the evidence, she began, "This court finds Officer Dana Cross guilty of misconduct in public office and of falsifying a police report." The words landed like weight on the air. Dana didn't cry. She didn't shout. She didn't argue. She just sat there, frozen. As the world she thought she controlled began to slide away from her, she avoided jail time. But she lost something else, something she never believed she could lose. Her badge. Her authority. The right to work in law enforcement again. Her name, once used as a sign of control on the streets of Pinebrook, it's become a warning. The judge adjourned the court. Reporters rushed outside. Microphones waved in the air. Cameras blinked red. Voices layered on top of each other asking questions. But Eric didn't turn toward them. He stepped outside with Marcus by his side, breathed in the warm air, and looked at the crowd without stepping into it. "You did it," Marcus said, placing a hand on his shoulder. Eric shook his head slightly. "I didn't do anything special. I just didn't back down." Those words echoed further than he realized. That evening, while a local panel on television argued about what this case meant for small police departments, Eric sat on his mother's porch with a chipped mug of coffee in his hands. The sky stretched wide over the quiet street. Kids rode by on bikes. Someone's dog barked in the distance. Life went on, but it felt different now, as if the ground itself was aware something had shifted. His mother came out with a plate of toast, sat beside him, and watched the street for a few seconds before speaking. "You okay?" she asked. He thought about it. "I think so. But it's not really over," she nodded. "It never really is. But this time, they had to look at you." They couldn't look away. He watched a young boy ride past, laughing with a friend, carefree in a way he wished could last forever. An older man walked his dog slowly, glancing at the porch with a small nod of respect. Days turned to weeks, and the town did what towns often do. It tried to move on. Headlines changed. News stories appeared. A storm rolled through. A school debate made the local news. People went back to work. But something settled into the spaces where avoidance used to live. The city announced a review of every traffic stop Officer Cross had made in the last 10 years. Letters went out to more than 30 people who had filed complaints that once disappeared into file cabinets and quiet hallways. Internal Affairs moved through stacks of records that had been collecting dust. The mayor released a statement. Promises of reform. Pledges of transparency. Words about restoring trust. Eric didn't put much faith in statements anymore. Words were easy. Proof was hard, so he did something else. With Marcus's help, he filed a civil suit not to chase a payout, but to secure access to records, patterns, and histories. He wanted more than his own victory. He wanted a trail of truth, one that would stay on paper even when people tried to forget. He didn't want the next man to stand alone and be told he couldn't prove what happened on a street. He'd walked all his life, quietly. Almost without ceremony, Dana left Pinebrook a month after the verdict. There was no press conference. No apology. No farewell. The house she'd lived in for years went up for sale. Her patrol car, once a symbol of her control, was moved and later sold at auction. Asterisk, her name slowly faded from daily conversation, but not from the town's memory. People still remembered. They remembered what she had done. And they remembered that, for once, the story had not ended in silence. At a town hall meeting about police oversight, held 6 weeks after the verdict, Raina stepped up to the microphone. She wasn't a politician. She wasn't a lawyer. She was a clerk who had simply decided that enough was enough. No one should be afraid to ask why they are being stopped, she said. No one should have to prove that they deserve basic respect. We can't fix every wound from the past, but we can stop pretending we don't see how they were made. Applause rose. It didn't explode, but it didn't fizzle either. It came steady and solid, the kind that said people understood exactly what she meant. Later that night, Eric sat at the small kitchen table, scrolling through his email. Hundreds of messages filled his inbox. Some were from people in Pine Brook. Many were from far away. Stories poured out. I went through the same thing, and nobody believed me. I wish I'd had someone like your lawyer. I never reported what happened to me because I thought it was pointless. He read each one. Not because he wanted attention, not because he enjoyed being the center of a public storm. He read them because every message reminded him why walking away had never been an option. Months passed. The case stopped trending. But change doesn't end when the cameras leave. At the high school on the east side, a government teacher added a segment to her class about recent local history. She talked about how laws work in theory and how power works in reality, and she used Eric's case as an example. At a barbershop on the main strip, younger customers listened more carefully when older men talked about back then, realizing that back then wasn't that long ago. Someone wrote in a church bulletin, "There is power in your voice, even if you tremble when you use it." Eric didn't rush back to his old life in Portland. He stayed. Not because he owed the town anything, but because he saw what could happen if he left too soon. He started attending city council meetings, sitting near the back at first, listening, observing who spoke and who stayed quiet, watching how rules were made and how they were stretched. Over time, people started turning toward him with questions. Could he help them understand a complaint form? Could he look over a letter before they sent it? Could he explain what rights they had when they were stopped? So he did. Every Tuesday night, he held a small workshop at the community center. They called it Know Your Rights, but it became more than that. A place where people told stories, shared fears, swapped advice. Teenagers came. Older folks came. Single parents came. And once, a quiet off-duty officer sat in the very back, saying nothing, just listening. One evening, a 17-year-old named Keon raised his hand. "Didn't you ever want to give up?" he asked, like, "Just let it go?" Eric thought about sleepless nights, long hours in that holding cell, the look on his mother's face when she saw his mugshot, the endless calls, the meetings, the fear that it might all go nowhere. "Yeah," he said, "a lot of times, but if I had given up, she'd still have her badge. And I'd still be wondering what might have happened if I had spoken up." Kia nodded, the weight of those words landing in him. "Guess we can't let stuff slide anymore, huh?" "No," Eric said. "Not anymore." Marcus visited from Savannah every few weeks. They talked about the civil case, but most of their long talks turned into something deeper. What real change looked like. What accountability meant. What it would take for towns like Pine Brook not just to react, but to grow. "It's not about punishing everyone," Eric said one night. "It's about making sure the truth actually matters." Marcus smirked softly. "You know, you could run for something local one day. Council board. Something." Eric shook his head with a tired smile. "Let me get through next Tuesday's workshop first." Word of what he was doing spread slowly but firmly. Not like gossip. Like roots. And somewhere, a couple of towns away. In a small rented apartment with bare walls and stiff silence, Dana Cross tried to build a new life with no badge and no title. She applied at private security firms, but her name followed her like a shadow. Background checks turned into closed doors. What once opened everything for her had become the reason doors stayed shut.